Ecco qua. Benvenuti.
I would like to welcome you all warmly here today, and it goes without saying that this is a very vibrant occasion for us to debate on important issues which are cutting edge in our contemporary society. And it is my pleasure to thank you all sincerely to stay here to debate on this specific purpose. I wish to thank everyone involved for their contribution for the success of the event. The collaborator, in particular Alex Giordano, which is the promoter of the seminar, Professor Metallo and Professor Tomasetti, the director of my department where I work from a long time. At this stage, and before we begin proceeding, I would like to give a special thanks to our guest of honor, Ben Casnocha, for choosing Salerno for the presentation of his volume. We are proud to host you in this university. And I would like to explain very briefly something of you, something of your curriculum. Ben Casnocha is very young, as you can see. I think you're 24. Quindi alla vostra età, ragazzi, a 24 anni Ben Casnocha. With our students, because they more or less have this age. And he's an entrepreneur and prize-winning writer. He's director of the Startup of You LLC, he's co-founder of Silicon Valley Junto, founder of the e-government company Concade, collaborator of Newsweek and Marketplace, nominated by Businessweek as one of the top young American entrepreneurs. So I think that we can be only proud to have him in our university. I would like to start giving him the word just because it's my intention to speak about some few words on the seminar that Alex Giordano and I have entitled Marketing to Societing, Startup and Social Innovation. We are at the 6th edition of Marketing Do, because it's a traditional event that we organize in the course of marketing at the University of Salerno, where we normally speak about the difficulty and the role of the profession of marketing and communication. What could have the suggestion to give to young students of marketing and communication to develop and to enrich their professional career and to have success in the job and in life, of course. I give you the word, and then we can start with the consideration on, we can discuss with the students and debate together. Thank you very much again.
Hello. I do not speak Italian, so I will speak in English. I'll try to speak slowly, but feel free to ask for clarifications as I present. What I'm going to do is speak for about 20 to 25 minutes. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am. I'm going to tell you about how I got inspired to become an entrepreneur, and then I will describe a little bit about my new book, which in English is called The Startup of You. In Italian, there's another title that I can't pronounce, but I've heard it translates into English as Stay in Touch. So let me tell you a bit about my background and why I'm excited to have this opportunity to speak with you this morning. I grew up and was raised in San Francisco, California. And when I was in school, when I was in the 6th grade, when I was about 12 years old, I had a class in school that was a technology elective. It was a class in which we learned how to fix Macintosh computers. So the way it worked is we had kind of the standard set of classes like history and mathematics and science. And then we could choose a kind of alternative class. You can choose film or art, and I chose computer repair. And so every day we learned how to fix Macintosh computers. And this class was very important to me, not only because it taught me a lot about how to fix computers, which is a useful skill, but because I had a very inspirational teacher. The teacher was brilliant, but like so many technology teachers, he was also a bit weird. For example, he denied that he had a real name. He made us address him as the Mac Doctor. So we didn't call him Professor or Mr. anything, we called him the Mac Doctor. And at the end of the semester, the Mac Doctor announced that we would have a final exam. But that in order to pass the final exam, all we would have to do is memorize a poem. So the exam was not a multiple choice set of questions. There was no essay to write. All we would have to do is memorize and recite a poem. And if we could do that, we would get an A+ in the class. And so the day before the final exam, our teacher, the Mac Doctor, distributed the poem that we would have to memorize. And we had 24 hours to memorize the poem. But it turned out actually not to be a poem, but the text of an Apple computer television advertisement that ran in the early 1990s called Think Different. Has anyone here heard of the Think Different advertisement? Yeah. One person, 2 people, 3 people. So the advertisement, you can go on YouTube and search for Apple Think Different, and you can watch the 60-second ad for yourself. But we had to memorize the text of the ad. And ever since having to memorize this advertisement in school, I have not forgotten how it goes. So I want to share it with you now, because I find the ad very inspirational, and it inspired me to become an entrepreneur. So the ad goes like this. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo, the way things always are. You can quote them, you can disagree with them, you can glorify, or you can hate them. But the only thing you can't do is ignore these people, because they change things, and they push the human race forward. And while some may see these people as the crazy ones, we see genius, because the people who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones who do. The people who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones who actually do change the world. And having to internalize and memorize that advertisement set me on a path to trying to think differently and change the world. And our teacher told us in school that one of the best ways to change the world was to become an entrepreneur, was to start businesses that fixed problems in the world. And so my friends and I, my classmates and I, left the class and began to look at the world as entrepreneurs do. We saw problems, we saw inefficiencies, we had complaints, but instead of just complaining about those problems, we tried to see if there was a business opportunity, if there's a way we could solve the problem and make money at the same time. And so for the next several years, I started a series of businesses, some very small. I sold pens to my classmates at ridiculously high prices. I sold candy to my brothers, and ultimately I sold software, increasingly sophisticated software, to organizations. The problem was when I was a student, I did not take a marketing class or a business class. All I had was some very basic technology skills, but I didn't know anything about business or entrepreneurship. I never heard a speaker who came in and spoke to us about entrepreneurship. And so I had to go out and try to teach myself about the topic. And I began to meet with people, anyone who would meet with me. I took them out to coffee, I took them out to lunch, and I asked them to teach me about how to start a business, about how to be a professional, about how to write a compelling email. And in fact, I traveled all over the world, including here in Italy, 2006, I believe was my first trip. I traveled all over the world meeting with as many smart people as I could to try to get feedback from them about how one goes about building meaningful businesses. And I met with entrepreneurs, I met with professors, I met with journalists, I met with CEOs of big companies and CEOs of small companies. And in all of these conversations, I learned a lot about business and I learned a lot about entrepreneurship. But I also realized something even more important. That I was meeting people who were very entrepreneurial, but they were not starting Silicon Valley technology businesses. I was meeting very entrepreneurial journalists in Latin America, for example, who were approaching their work and approaching their life in a very innovative way. But they're not founding a new business, and yet they were still entrepreneurial. And it forced me to expand the definition of what an entrepreneur really is. Because we normally think about an entrepreneur as someone who founds a new business, right? Someone who starts a business. And while that's certainly an accurate definition, it struck me that actually we need to expand the definition and rather define it as anyone who thinks entrepreneurially, anyone who's the entrepreneur of their own life. Because it occurred to me that there were all sorts of people who were very entrepreneurial, but not starting their own business. And so over the last few years, I've been thinking harder about this idea, about the fact that entrepreneurship is more a life idea, and that the skills of entrepreneurship are relevant to all of us right now, whether or not we want to start a business. And when I teamed up with my co-author of the new book, Reed, who started the professional network LinkedIn, Reed had arrived at a similar conclusion to me. He started LinkedIn to be the technology platform on which each of us can be the entrepreneur of our own life, be CEO of our own life, using those technology tools to help manage that. So my thesis for today, and a topic that we can discuss during question and answer, is about how each of us can become more entrepreneurial students, more entrepreneurial doctors, journalists, professors, and talk about some of the specific things that the world's greatest entrepreneurs do and how we can learn from them and apply those lessons and those skills to our life. So what I want to do is spend a few minutes and talk about some of the specific things that characterize the greatest entrepreneurs and how each of us can apply those things in our lives today. So are you following me so far? Some? Okay. So let's talk about a few of the specific things that entrepreneurs do and how we can learn from them and apply them to our lives today. I want to pick up on something the professor said, and I didn't get the full translation, but I believe I heard the word asset and the word soft and the word hard. So let's start by talking about assets. Now, when an entrepreneur starts a business, he or she is trying to make money, right? The goal is, at least one of the goals is to make money. is to be profitable, is to sell a product and make money. But here's the funny thing about what entrepreneurs do. They don't try to make money often, in many cases, they don't try to make money immediately, right? On day one, they're not optimizing for profitability. They're not trying to make the most money possible. Instead, they're trying to learn about their customers, learn about market needs, learn about competitors. And if they can learn a lot about the market in which they're starting a business, in the long run, they will make a lot more money. In other words, they prioritize their soft assets, their knowledge and learning, over their hard assets, just the actual dollars and money that they make. And this is an important idea to understand because it's very relevant to all of us if we want to become the entrepreneurs of our own lives. So I'll pose a scenario to you. Say you're about to graduate from school and you're committed to being the CEO of your own career and trying to change the world. And you're presented with two different job offers. One job offer is to go work at McDonald's and earn, I'll use dollars, $20,000 a year serving Big Macs. Or you take a job where you earn a little less money, say $15,000 a year or less or slightly more. But it's a job in which you learn a tremendous amount, right? Maybe it's at a think tank or at a nonprofit or at a business that offers a lot of opportunities for professional growth. If you're being entrepreneurial, you're thinking about the long term, and you're prioritizing the career opportunity that offers more learning and slightly less salary, right? Does that make sense? So just as entrepreneurs prioritize learning over profitability in the early days, when you're young, especially when you're in your 20s and your 30s, it's critical to prioritize accumulating soft assets, knowledge, experiences, connections, skills, over earning raw money. Because in the long run, the person who's learned more and the person who has developed a commitment to ongoing learning makes a lot more money than the person who just accepts the job opportunity that pays the most in cash. So that's the first theme I'll touch on. That's that if you want to be CEO of your own life, and it's something we talk about in the book, think about your soft assets. Think about how you're investing in yourself. Not investing in the stock market, not investing in a mutual fund, but investing in yourself, investing in those soft assets that make you a more competitive professional. Okay, the second theme I want to talk about is what we call competitive advantage. Again, we're trying to learn from what entrepreneurs do and apply them to our lives today. So when an entrepreneur starts a business, they face competition, right? There's always competition in a business, and you're always trying to think about whether your product is better than some other company's product. And we need to take the same approach in our career. We need to compare ourselves to the person sitting next to you and ask yourself, what makes you unique? Why would someone want to hire you over the person sitting next to you? What do you have to offer to the world that makes you special? Or in other words, what is your competitive advantage? What skill do you have that no one else has? Or what connection do you have that no one else has? And this is sometimes a scary thing to think about. But it's important to think about because in Italy, in America, and in other rich countries all over the world, there's a huge problem, and it's called youth unemployment. Young people are having a very hard time finding jobs. They're having a very hard time launching their career. And that's part of why we wrote the book, is to provide a playbook for how an individual can launch their career more successfully. And one of the things you have to do that is to be very realistic about how difficult it is to land a job or launch your career. And that's why you have to confront the somewhat scary notion of competitive advantage. Asking yourself the uncomfortable question, what makes me special? And if I can't think of anything, what am I doing to invest in myself today to make me more competitive, to make me more desirable to employers? And the specific way you can think about your competitive advantage is by considering 3 different factors. The first factor are your existing assets, your existing skills, your existing strengths, your existing network. And you probably have many more assets than you think. I've met students all over the world, and students always underestimate their existing assets. They say to themselves, I don't have a network. When in fact, they have a network of all their classmates, their parents' friends, their teachers' friends. Every student actually has a fairly significant professional network already. Or students sometimes tell me, I don't really have a unique strength or a unique perspective. To which I say, you're young. Brands all over the world want to hear from young people, because young people today are tomorrow's leaders. You have a perspective on culture, a perspective on the world that people want to hear about. And that's a unique advantage that you have that perhaps older professionals do not. So the first part of developing a competitive advantage is thinking about your existing assets. What do you have going for you now? The second thing to think about are your aspirations, your dreams, your passions, your interests. Maybe you aspire to be a world-famous journalist someday. You may not have the existing assets to realize that dream, but it's important to keep track of that, because you never really want to relinquish your aspirations. You always want to keep track of, your deepest dreams, if you have dreams. And by the way, not everyone has a dream, and that's okay. So if you have aspirations, if you have natural interests, it's important to think about how you can try to build a career that allows you to incorporate those interests and do a better job at it. And the third factor, the third piece of the triangle, if you will, are the market realities. It's the reality of the situation you live in. So you may dream of being a world-famous journalist, but you know what? The journalism industry is in a lot of trouble right now. And that would probably not be a very wise profession to try to enter as a young person today, unless you really felt like you had an innovative way of breaking into that field. Because print newspapers and print magazines are struggling economically. And so you need to think about the market realities around you, just as entrepreneurs do. When I started my first company, I didn't close my eyes and dream about what I wanted to do and then did it blindly. Instead, I researched where the opportunities were, where the risks were. I talked to lots of people to try to find out whether there was actual demand for the product that I wanted to build. And so in our careers, we need to be thinking about all 3 of those things at the same time. Our assets, our aspirations, and the market realities around us. And we develop a competitive advantage as a professional when we choose work and we find a job that accommodates all 3 of those things. Okay, I'll cover one more concept and then we can open it up to a clarification or discussion. I'll talk about networks, because that is somewhat of a theme of the day. I mentioned earlier that, for whatever reason, young people believe they do not have a network. And in fact, we all do. We all have a network. And what's important is to think about your extended network. So I'll use some specific terminology on how to think about this. So if I'm friends with someone, so we'll take an example. What's your name?
Grace.
Grace? So if I'm friends with Grace, and she's a connection of mine, she's in my network, I know who she is, she's considered a first-degree connection, right? I know her now, she's in my network. And what's her name?
Dalila.
Dahlia?
Dalila.
Dalila. Now Grace and Dalila may be friends, right? I don't know Dalila personally, but I know Grace. Now most people would think my network only consists of one person, Grace. But in fact, your network consists of friends of friends. In other words, everyone you know who knows someone else who you don't know, you actually are connected to that person. Because Grace can introduce me to Delilah, or Delilah. I'll call you Dahlia. Grace can introduce me, right? And that's the power of an introduction. And so if you think about your network, maybe you have 30 friends, or 50 friends, or 150 Facebook friends, or 200 Facebook friends. But when you log on to Facebook and you view your friend list, that's not your whole network. Your network includes all of those people's friends who you don't already know. Because when you're looking for a job, when you're trying to start a career, you often have to ask for an introduction to someone via your existing network. And so it's very powerful when you think about how big your network actually is. It's your 200 friends who you know, but it's the 5,000 people who those people know in turn. And so your network is already much more powerful than you think. And if you deploy your network in an effective way, you can get a personal introduction to almost anyone you need to meet in order to develop as a professional. And of course, you always want to get personal introductions when thinking about your career and thinking about being entrepreneurial. A personal introduction is like having a passport at the border. You can walk right through. And so when you're looking for a job or looking for advice in life, getting an introduction to someone in your extended network is the fastest way to meet someone important or meet someone intelligent. And this is what, as entrepreneurs, we do all day. And so if you want to build a company, you'll be doing this every single day. Because nothing easy is done alone. Life's a team sport. The smartest individual is always defeated by a team of 10 reasonably smart people. The greatest football player in the world will always lose if it's one person against 10. No matter how bad those 10 people are. And so as entrepreneurs, we're always building networks. We're always asking for introductions to get help and get advice in order to build a successful business. And as entrepreneurs of our own lives, we have to be similarly committed to building relationships, to asking for introductions, and to using our network to find the best opportunities. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. There's a lot more we could talk about, but what I'd like to do is essentially turn it back to the hosts, and we can go in a direction that you guys want to go, or we can field questions directly about what may be on your mind. So, thank you for listening. What bubble actually means is up for debate. So, we are in the technology industry. It's very frothy, as we say. There's a lot of energy and hype and momentum around social networking, around mobile, and around local technology. But I don't think we're in a bubble like we were in the late 1980s. The businesses today, whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook or even Instagram, are much more solid, making tons and tons of money, unlike the companies of the 90s. So I think it's just a tremendous time to be in the tech industry. There's incredible opportunity, and I'm excited. I'm not anxious about any financial access. A rather technical question to kick us off, but anything's fair game, so ask whatever you want. Do we need to think about, and how do we deal with some of the challenges that are here in Italy in terms of building a career? It is interesting. I've been in Italy for 3 days, and I've heard a lot of Italian. I'm not saying you did this. Actually, that was an awesome question. But I've heard a lot of Italians essentially bash their own culture. I think it's interesting. There are cultural differences in every country around the world, and those differences provide both opportunity and challenges depending on what you're trying to do. But I think the interesting thing about growing up today is that because of the internet, you actually are less restricted by the neighborhood you happen to be born into. I mean, I was born in San Francisco, but I used the internet to hire my first employee in Bangladesh, and second employee in Canada, to connect with mentors all over the world online. And so where you actually live today, whether it's Italy or California or India, matters less, because you can connect to networks of people all around the world. And so there's no question that the culture in which you were brought up and the opportunities that are physically near you shape your chances, shape the way you think, without question. But especially for our generation, we have the opportunity, you can physically move to a new place, but you can engage new cultures online and build real relationships with people all over the world and learn from the way they're thinking and get ideas from them. So I think what I would say is, I don't know what everyone should do, everyone's different, but I would encourage, if you feel like you want to continue to expand your mind and discover new ways of thinking, new kinds of opportunities, take advantage of the internet, take advantage of online communities and blogs, and see how that kind of stimulates you and challenges you and inspires you, because it certainly inspired me, and I think we're very, very fortunate to have that opportunity. Our parents did not. Our parents were truly limited by essentially which companies within a 5-block radius could offer me a job. And if you were born in a really small town in a really poor country, basically you were screwed, right? Whereas now you have the opportunity, no matter where you live, to get exposed to ideas from all over the world, and that's very, very exciting.
Values, laws, behaviors. When you stay in a network, the difference is that you are much more free, and you can go in and out when you want. The depth of relationship is different, because in the community they are stronger, because we get used to be much more linked with a physical relation, with a personal relation, and less with a virtual one. So I think that we have to change our mind and to be much more turned up with your mindset, American mindset, which maybe is cutting edge and update, and maybe can give much more opportunity to the students, and that's my consideration. Another consideration I want to give you: don't you think it's dangerous to transfer entrepreneurial values to individual?
Well, I guess to your first point, I completely agree. I was in Indonesia recently, in Asia, and I was speaking to some students, I think, and I told them, essentially, never listen to your parents for life advice. And it was, this like dropping a bomb on the classroom, because the bond between child and parent is extremely strong, which is amazing in many ways. But for terms of thinking about life and career, it can be challenging because the parental perspective, the perspective of parents, tends to be very risk averse, tends to be stay close to me, think like me, help me. And that can sometimes stifle or limit your ability to think big and think different. So I want to re-emphasize, I think your first point's very interesting and very true, that building networks of maybe looser ties to help introduce new ways of thinking, and perhaps thinking that challenges some of the existing authority structures in your life, be it family or politicians or teachers or whomever, will allow you to become a more independent thinker, and I think that's important. I think to the second question of is it dangerous, there are certainly risks and risks involved when you think entrepreneurially, but there are risks involved in any mindset and skill set. And I would argue it's more dangerous to accept the status quo. It's more dangerous to do what everyone else is doing. It's more dangerous to build a life that's very conventional. Because if you just follow the rules today, you will not get ahead. And I think there are a lot of reasons why it's a challenging employment situation for young people. In the US, highest unemployment since World War II. In Italy, someone told me 1 in 3 young people are unemployed. So whatever the current model is not working for this global competitive world. And so it's kind of like, look, the current model's not working, we need a new model. The entrepreneurial model has drawbacks and problems. It's not perfect, but it's a different model, and it's one that I think is worth evaluating as we're doing today. But I agree that there are dangers involved with anything, including this one. Is that?
Maybe a complete application of entrepreneurial model to individual life could have some problem, could create difficulties for individual and for person. But it's my doubt, yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
Okay. C'è qualche altra Alex Giordano?
Posso? When do you ask yourself what made you... when you ask yourself what made you so special, what was the answer?
Good listening and good questions. Well, the question was, when you ask yourself when I asked myself what made me special, what did I answer? And I guess one thing that's important, when you ask yourself what makes me different, you ask it in a local way, not a global way, right? So what matters to you in this economy is what makes you special compared to the person sitting next to you right now. It's not what makes you special compared to every human being on the planet, right? Because they're not necessarily competing with you for the best opportunity. And so you only have to be better in a relative way, not an absolute way. Does that make sense? So for example, in business, for whatever reason, a lot of business people are unable to write. They cannot write coherent sentences. We're just not taught writing in school for some reason. We're taught how to write literary essays, but business writing is not taught. And so when I was starting my journey as an entrepreneur, I found myself being better at writing than most executives who I was working with. Now, was I the world's greatest writer? Absolutely not. Was I better than everyone at writing? No way. But I was better than the people who happened to be around me at the time. And that provided a very real competitive advantage. Because people were smarter than me, more accomplished than me in many ways. But in this specific way, I had something to offer that they needed. And so that was a specific skill. And as a result, I decided to actually focus on that skill and try to make that skill potent. normally we try to get better at our weaknesses. Like, have you ever given your parents a report card, with your grades, with your marks from school? Parents always focus on the class you did poorly in, right? You did well in math, you did well in science. Oh, but you didn't do so well in history. You need to do better at history. Right? But in fact, in the professional world, if you're not doing well in something, you basically want to forget it. And you want to focus on what you're already doing well at. You want to focus on your strengths and try to make that strength unstoppable. So, for example, if in school you get an A+ in math and an F in history, the natural instinct is try to be better at history. When in fact, the entrepreneurial approach is double down on math, focus even more on math, and try to become unstoppable. And so I think that's how I thought about competitive advantage. Is what am I better at than people around me? And once I've identified that, how can I focus even more on becoming a better writer? So that was my personal experience on that. Is that clear? Okay.
Here's another question. Your book try to focus on tension to improvement, continuous. So that's why we have to live like a startup. Don't you think that there are people that are not able to do this, maybe because they could feel stressful, or they could not have these capabilities, capacities, these skills? So it appears like, how do you say, if we want to sweep off all the people that are not possess these requirements. So what do you think about normal people, not excellent?
Well, I think everyone has the potential to be excellent. I think there's, again, I think it's all relative, right? So you don't have to be excellent in the absolute sense. You just have to be better than whatever market you're playing in. And so, if you're in a market that consists of normal people, you just have to be better than the other normal people, right? And I think everyone has the ability to improve themselves. It's, I'm not so foolish as to think that everyone can become equally smart or equally accomplished. Obviously, we're born with certain differences, but our capacity to develop new habits, to change the way we think about things is remarkable and vastly underrated by most people. I mean, this has been shown in physical exercise. When elite athletes are training in sports and they're pushed to the edge, they often think that they can't go any further. Like when bicyclists are training, for the Tour de France or something, after like a week of intense training, they tell their trainers, I can't go any further, I'm exhausted. And yet the human body is able, they can go for days more, right? And so your body, we're wired from evolution to simply reproduce, right? Have sex, have babies, and then get old and die, right? That's how we're wired. That's the only evolutionary mandate in life. And so our body sends us signals like, oh, I'm tired. And so, get off the bicycle or stop working or stop trying. Because as far as our genes are concerned, we just need to reproduce. And if we reproduce and raise healthy children, then we've served our purpose from a very cold genetic perspective. And so I think we vastly underrate our ability to do way more than that. And we give in to these signals like, oh, I'm tired, or oh, I'm normal, or oh, I can't learn anything more. We give into those way too easily. So, again, there's all sorts of issues involving that. It's a much more complicated issue, but I guess at a simple level, I would say I think individuals are capable of much more than they think. So we could go more on that if you have a follow-up or.
ovviamente il mio pensiero era quello di appunto evidenziare come ci potevano essere anche delle situazioni diverse. When people doesn't have psychological insight or psychological strength to do something, it's not a problem of being lazy or be tired. It's a problem of motivation, of some other things. Maybe the tension to improvement is right, but maybe it could be a very strong behavior that we can have, and that can shift our life to other path and to dangerous path, risky path.
I think the contemporary age suggests us an opportunity to escape from this situation. Okay. Vorrei dire una cosa ai ragazzi, soprattutto, lo dico in italiano, cioè così arriva a tutti, magari aiuti tu bene. No, non mi tratterò a lungo perché il tempo stringe, purtroppo è ben dovrà lasciarci. Volevo soltanto approfittare di alcuni stimoli della giornata per fare anche un po', diciamo, una sintesi rispetto alle cose che ci siamo dette nelle puntate precedenti, e vi devo dire che riesco come sempre a fare un salto in avanti e a ridurre la noia delle mie parole anche grazie agli interventi precedenti, soprattutto quello del professor Metallo, che è riuscito in poche frasi poi a sintetizzare quello che è lo spirito del society, sostanzialmente, quindi questa necessità quindi di fare un distinguo, no, tra quello che è umano e quello che non lo è, sostanzialmente fondamentale. Noi abbiamo visto questo diciamo, discorso che ci ha fatto il professore, dove la ricchezza delle compagnie fino ad oggi è economica, quella degli umani è relazionale, e quindi queste due cose sono ben distinte l'una dall'altra. Secondo me però la suggestione interessante sarebbe questa, sarebbe quella di vedere in un momento come oggi, dove il contemporaneo ci suggerisce un'economia del futuro che è sempre più relazionale, come convivono queste due dimensioni quasi opposte. Quindi in un mondo dove i confini tra produzione e consumo sono molto sfumati, no? Dove domanda e offerta non sono più separati come una volta, cioè pensate, abbiamo fatto l'esempio banale, no? Pensate anche all'iPhone, quando lo compro io sono nella domanda, quando faccio un'application sono nell'offerta, quindi ormai siamo in un mondo dove questi confini si sfumano e dove, ben ce lo sottolinea, il patrimonio relazionale delle persone può diventare anche qualcosa che entra all'interno delle dinamiche economiche. Tuttavia la crescita, dice bene il professore Metallo, della ricchezza è sempre una crescita di ricchezza sociale, cioè vuol dire anche Polani, no? Ci diceva che il marketing è embedato nella società, e quindi sostanzialmente non c'è mai un'impresa, quindi a prescindere quindi appunto dalle mode, dalle tendenze, quindi da un atteggiamento forzatamente etico, a volte se vogliamo diventa, lo diciamo sempre qui tra questo gruppo di persone, a volte si attende al marketing che fa il marketing di se stesso, e quindi a volte in una deriva forzatamente etica si nasconde quello che è già nella società un assetto fondamentale, cioè quello di capire che l'obiettivo di tutto alla fine è la serenità e la felicità tra le persone. Quando invece questo, come forse è successo negli ultimi anni, prende una deriva meramente economicistica, si va verso delle aberrazioni che hanno portato un po' al fallimento del presente. Tuttavia, durante questa giornata e con voi vorrei invitarvi a questo gioco. Cioè, la cosa interessante è quello di capire che forse non è l'uomo tanto la metafora a cui fa riferimento, anzi forse l'uomo in quanto ego è la metafora da superare. Cioè sostanzialmente credo che la metafora da apprendere dalla contemporaneità sia più vicina allo sciame delle api, all'alveare, no? Pensate alla cultura del network, è una cultura che supera l'ego e che sostanzialmente va verso una dinamica delle reti. C'è una scienza che si chiama biomimicry, non so se la conoscete, appunto, che va a studiare tutti i sistemi naturali come le api e tanti altri per capire se è possibile tradurre dei modelli finanche diciamo manageriali. E questa cosa ci leva anche un po' dall'imbarazzo dell'eccellenza, no? Che diceva Teresa, cioè diceva sì, i non eccellenti E non fa niente, perché in una dinamica di sciame sostanzialmente tutti hanno il loro ruolo. Cioè sostanzialmente un'idea vincente, una startup vincente, come abbiamo visto, è quella che sostanzialmente risolve una tensione socioculturale che già esiste e che quindi soddisfa un problema che attende di essere risolto, non da un guru, non da un messia. Questa, ragazzi, è una storia vecchia, okay? È una storia del passato, cioè non c'è più nessuno di noi che è chiamato a fare il supereroe, perché ancora una volta la storia del salva te stesso, apro la parentesi, fregandone degli altri. Invece il futuro, in questa nuova etica, sostanzialmente che quella che la rete ci suggerisce, è un futuro fatto appunto di relazioni intese appunto come rete. Attenzione, quindi una domanda interessante l'avete fatta voi, ci dice ok, vabbè, capito, una bella storia, a Silicon Valley è facile. Io ve lo so, alcuni punti tecnici che non ve li faccio per non deprimervi, perché Ben è riuscito nel suo ruolo, che era quello di ispirarvi, quello di darvi fiducia, quello è il motivo per cui l'abbiamo invitato. Ma ci sarebbero tante motivazioni tecniche come l'accesso al cliente e tante altre che sono molto più difficili rispetto alla Silicon Valley. Con attenzione ragazzi, se è vero tutto quello che abbiamo detto, ce ne fotte che siamo in una tech bubble, caro amico mio, e che non possiamo fare la Facebook del futuro. Sai perché? Perché molto probabilmente, se è vero che il mercato è una risonanza, una dialettica tra il talento individuale, io metterei collettivo, e lo spirito del tempo, il territorio in cui si insiste, molto probabilmente la nostra Facebook del futuro è legata alla marmellata di mele, è legata alle alici, alla cultura dell'intrattenimento, alla cultura dell'ospitalità. Ok? Quindi stiamo attenti che molto probabilmente questi mezzi e questa etica vanno tradotta in quello che sono la nostra specificità, però in una dimensione che è sempre quella collettiva. Che uno di voi si alza domani e inizia a vendere la sua marmellata non serve a niente. Se il territorio in cui insiste non capisce che è il momento di fare un certo tipo di agricoltura, se non capiscono le persone che ci dicono che è il momento forse di fare accoglienza in un certo modo, se gli enti pubblici non capiscono che è il caso di iniziare anche a mettere nei calcoli l'impatto sociale. E quindi perché no? Cioè, come mai in questo paese è una cosa così facile da vedere a quale azienda, quindi non solo il no profit, non solo le associazioni, risolve un problema sociale della collettività, e questo lo vado a calcolare con dei misuratori e lo trasformo in sgravi fiscali. Allora questo sarebbe secondo me un'etica nuova, no? Un nuovo societing a cui facciamo riferimento, quindi una rilettura, diciamo, del detto del famoso detto stay angry, stay foolish, ok? Dove affamati siamo affamati, ok? Ma quel siate folli, attenzione, non lo traducete come siate creativi, bizzarri, fuori dagli schemi, perché quello lì è ancora una volta il vecchio sistema che vi sta creando un ruolo nel vostro teatrino di outsider. Quel siate folli significa pensate fuori dall'ovvio e iniziate a rivedere proprio le categorie di base, e quindi pensate a poter anche scompaginare il tempo, il presente con il futuro e con il passato, perché vi ripeto, forse nelle alici, nella marmellata di arance e nella cultura dell'ospitalità c'è il vostro futuro. Grazie mille. Non lo pigliate paura, mi raccomando, che quella è la cultura della paura, ok? Questa qua non andate avanti, credeteci, e in questo senso coltivate le vostre relazioni, come diceva poi il professore, sono relazioni non virtuali, ma sono proprio relazioni umane, sono relazioni fatte di profondità, sono relazioni fatte di lavoro, di sudore, di fatica, di studio, di ricerca, così come ognuno di noi cerca di fare nella vita. Non vi fate impressionare da una cultura invece che vuole mantenervi nell'ovvio e quindi mantenervi al posto vostro. Okay? Il posto vostro è un posto in primissimo piano, insieme però. Okay? Ciao.
I want to thank you, my guest, Ben Casnocha. I think that we are on time. Ok. To finish, non so se c'è qualche altra domanda che qualcuno vuole fare. Ok. The last question. Ah, sì.
Yeah, there are a bunch of books outside. Are those free or for sale? Or Books outside are for sale? Okay, so if you want to buy a book, I'm happy to sign it outside.
C'è uno sconto almeno, sì.
No, no, prezzo di copertina.
Ufficiale.
Fidiamoci.
Vengo dal mondo.
So, what we're doing, question?
C'era lui, c'era lui.
You wrote your group in America. In Italy, there is a different focus. We are feeling the crisis. In Italy, the economy, the field this year is going down of 1.4%. In this context, and with the current crisis, how can we improve ourselves?
The question is, in the current crisis, how can we improve ourselves, we being Italians? I would say the crisis, if we want to call it a crisis, is global. And even when the crisis ends, certain things will have changed permanently in how the economy is structured. And so what we need to do is what we need to do now in the crisis, and what I think we'll need to do forever, you know, whether there's a crisis or not. So I'm not sure kind of the crisis ought to change how we think about, say, career strategy. I think there will be global competition for years to come, and it will be a much more competitive environment for years to come. So I think I don't think we can get too focused on this crisis that's hitting right now, because, and I think this is especially the case in Europe, I think there will be years of uncertainty, austerity, whatever you want to call it. So I won't be too focused on the crisis. I think we need to think about what are the things that are within my control, right? What can I control in my life? Not politicians, not family, not teachers. What is in my control right now that I can do to take control of my life and build a better future?